in the mirror, I also see the image of a political candidate, symbolic, we come to that, in Colombia. And he says, even to us, who he recognized was it? De la Espriella. Like when I watch his videos doing campaigning. Come to that. The plants and clay objects. So, some of these objects must be plants or clay. I know you never deciphered that. Therefore I do it for you. Where plants and clay objects move as if they were alive. Isn't that incredible what this guy dreams? Are these objects more or less alive? Does a scorpion move? Does a snake move? Does a serpent move? Does a man, Ophiuchus, the snake bearer, move? They are living objects. But how are they plants and clay? It seems like an enchanted place. Enchanted. Enchanted is itself something very negative. Witchcraft, all that stuff that we find in several, even now Protestant churches. So here you see these terrible guys, complete. Here is the comet in Libra, looking back through the mirror, seeing the scorpion, seeing the snake bearer, seeing the serpent coiled around. And here's the head of the serpent. These are the terrible things that he sees. Ophiuchus, this guy here, is compared with a political candidate of Colombia, because he's the only human there, that converted from being an atheist to Catholicism. This is exactly what De la Espriella did. He was a confessing atheist, godless man, and then all of a sudden, he converted to Catholicism, and he does now a lot of videos and connects his Catholic conviction. He pretended to have had an encounter with God, a God-like encounter. But indeed, he tries to connect state and church and make new adepts for the Pope of Rome. Sorry if some are Catholics here, but it's not good news for Catholics, what I have as a Protestant church leader. We know since years and years and years that the popes are the snake bearers, and even some in the Catholic Church say now it's true. The Pope, it started with the Jesuit Pope Francis, that's what they say, that they can recognize that in the Vatican are happening terrible things, and that indeed they are worshipping Satan, the snake, the old serpent of the Bible. Catholics say that. Conservative Catholics, not me. So now, the dream says he sees De la Espriella, the political candidate of Colombia, but it's a symbol for something much more important. So if you don't know him, that's De la Espriella. Okay? So who is he symbolizing? A man that we talked about to be Abaddon and Apollyon, the destroyer of the earth. It's Donald J. Trump, who has a similar, and the press spoke about it, encounter with God. When the assassination attempt on his life in 2024, while he was in a presidential campaign, the dream spoke about campaigning. Remember that? He was almost shot and got then a wound at the ear. Then he stood up, said, fight, 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 and later all the press and everybody said he encountered God. He is elected by God to lead the most powerful nation of the earth to peace. And he himself is eager to get the Peace Nobel Prize while he is amassing troops, even now warplanes to Russia, B-2 bombers, and he has now the atomic aircraft carrier and an atomic submarine in front of Venezuela, is threatening and gave the day before yesterday the order to bombard Venezuela. That's the peace president. We said years ago he is the destroyer in the Bible, Abaddon and Apollyon. And he is exactly that. And the dream ciphers saying, this is the snake bearer, not the Pope of Rome this time, but this is Donald J. Trump who bears the snake. So who is then the Pope of Rome? Yeah, it's the snake. So, indeed, and many take note, indeed Donald Trump is furthering the agenda of Rome, of Pope Leo XIV. Adventists wait since century, 2 centuries almost, for the Sunday law, the mark of the beast, the mark of Rome, being inflicted over the US and worldwide. So he's furthering this agenda. When he was asked about his favorite Bible verse, he would not be able to recite one. When he was asked in his presidential oath for his inauguration to put his hand on the Bible, he would refuse. He would refuse. He's not a Christian. He is a pagan. And since we have a US-American Pope, he is putting forward this agenda fervently. For what? To lead people to the serpent. He used a terrible event in September 2025. Remember, the comet turned green on the 7th of September. What happened there? We are aware that persecution always happens when church and state unite. Always. In all the history of humanity. Therefore, the Constitution of the United States, for those that fled Pope papacy in the 1700s, 1800s, was clearly stating that there shall be always a separation between church and state, so that no persecution of any belief should happen, not of Catholics, not of Protestants, not of Islamists, no persecution, because the church has nothing to do with the state and the state has nothing to do with the church. And the spirit of prophecy said, when church and state unite, then persecution will happen. And this is exactly the agenda of Donald J. Trump, the unification. On September 10, but he needs an event. He needs something that would deceive the people. Not because they believe, oh, he's a good Protestant, he's a Bible believer. He's not. Only 3 days after Free Atlas turned green to show death. Free Atlas was warning with the color green about death. Charlie Kirk, a very, very influential political and religious activist, was assassinated on September 10. And a great false revival started in the US. It went all over the world press what was happening. Everybody went to Sunday church again. This was prophesied, this false revival, to take place shortly before the second coming of Christ. If you do not look up, if you only look down to the press or into your laptop or your computer, then you would have seen that event, this assassination event, and this extremely huge revival of Christianism in the US. And who was the leading party of that? Politicians. Donald J. Trump and J.D. Vance, the vice president. They were mainly kissing the widow of Charlie Kirk, now saying we have to fight against the fanatics. Now we need laws to bring any fanatical fundamentalist into their borderlines. This is the great event. This is the great falling away. This is a politician who carries the cross of Jesus into the meeting of state leaders. Huh? Can you now grasp why the temple is defiled? It should be a Protestant sanctuary, and they bring a false revival and a false cross of a false Sabbath keeper, Charlie Kirk, inside. The dream now points us to what is going on in God's temple. His people are defiled through, Catholicism in disguise and a false revival. A great debate to keep the Sabbath was starting, because Charlie Kirk, shortly before his death, was starting to talk about the true biblical Sabbath. But when he died, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, all the leaders, even the church leaders, all of a sudden said, we have to go to on Sunday to church. Instead of hearing what the dead Charlie Kirk said, the seventh-day Sabbath is the true Sabbath of the Lord, they called to the Sunday going, to the Sunday church. So they turned it around. And then Trump also came out and said that he is now understanding what Turning Point USA is. This was the ministry of Charlie Kirk. And he understood all of a sudden Agenda 2025, which is a Sunday law movement. Look what Ellen G. White said. We are not anymore Seventh-day Adventists, but we still believe in the spirit of prophecy. She said, as the defenders of Sunday argue that the law should be enforced, and this is what Donald J. Trump now with Agenda 2025 is enforcing, trying to enforce. They will say that the few who stand in opposition to a national institution should not be tolerated. Yes, this is happening right in front of your eyes. A decree will finally be issued. Where was a decree in the Bible issued? Purim. Death to the Israelites. Against those who hallow the Sabbath of the fourth commandment, denouncing them as deserving of the severest punishment. No, not just you pay a fine because you did not bake the homosex marriage cake. You will get a fine of $10,000, or you go to jail a week. No, this time the severest punishment when you transgress the Sunday law. Thus the people of God will be brought into great peril. This is exactly what we expect right now. The time of great tribulation. She said in another place, when the Protestant churches shall unite with the world, secularism, church and state, and with the papal power to oppose those who keep the commandments of God, then there will be persecution. And this persecution is in the Bible, the Easter Purim persecution that must still take place. I just skim through that. How many times Ellen G. White compared these last days with what happened in the book of Esther. Ahasuerus, this was the king married to Esther, death decree was a model for the final decree against God's people, prophets and kings. Haman, that was the guy who was deceiving the king even. Spirit of persecution repeats in the end-time union of church and state. By the word. God's faithful order Mordecai at the gate, that was the uncle of Esther, was a good Jew, refusing to bow to human laws that contradict God's laws. This is exactly what we have to do. We have not to bow to human laws. We have to bow always, when the human laws are against God's laws, we have always to obey God more than humans. The remnant will face a similar crisis, she said. False worship enforced by civil power, false revival, parallel to the great controversy. As in Esther's day, she said, deliverance comes out at the last moment, when the death decree is already decided. Comes. I show you the date. Showing God's intervention on behalf of his covenant people. Jesus himself said, no flesh will survive when I would not rescue you a little even in the shortened time. Time has to be shortened. If not, no flesh would survive. So as I said now various times, it's Purim that fulfills this Jubilee year, not Hanukkah. The Jubilee year will see the final deliverance of God's people amidst a great crisis of false revival and persecution according to the type of Purim described in the book of Esther. Esther herself is a type for the pure people of God, the Queen Esther. People of God is always a woman, and Esther is the pure woman of God in the Bible. What we see at the heavenly cross of Jesus in December depicting a Hanukkah rapture would be a contradiction to what we understood about the feast type for the Jubilee. This is what I want you to understand. Will the dream of God give us the true date of our deliverance? That's the theme of the whole sermon. We had this dream Jesus looking back as free-eye Atlas into the temple, what is inside the holy place. And he said, the plants and the clay objects move as if they are alive. It seems like an enchanted place. So look at this. These guys there, scorpion, serpent bearer. The dream leaves no doubt about what and who has crept into the holy place of the temple of God. As we learned in one of my last Sabbath sermons, the living plant there is the serpent. Because I told you that the serpent in another setting was the vine of the devil. It's a creeping plant, no? So that's the plant, to have a symbol and not say, I saw a serpent. I saw a living plant. And Scorpio was already also in many, many Sabbath sermons before deciphered as the beast with the 10 horns and the 7 heads of Revelation 17. That the harlot church rides. The whole image of Ophiuchus with the serpent and underneath Scorpio is the statue of the world kingdoms of Daniel 2. And this statue is prophesied to be smitten by a rock, by a stone, not cut out by man's hand. And we come to that, hopefully. The feet, Scorpio, were partially formed by clay and iron in Daniel 2. And Scorpio, does it have feet? It has feet. No? It had 10 stars from here to here. And then comes the head. Therefore it has 10. So, these 10 toes of the statue of Daniel that will be then smitten by the stone. So, these, according to Daniel, were formed because of clay and iron, and they could not cling together. The 10 kingdoms after the Roman Empire broke, Europe broke into 10 areas. That's the 10 kingdoms that we still have. Now they tried to come back together in the European Union, but they are not really agreeing in everything, and they have always trouble with the European Union, and some states agree more and some less. They are of clay, partially religious, and of iron, also partially state, or whatever you want to say. It's not clinging together. You cannot mix clay with iron. Therefore, it's a brittle fundament for a statal or religious union. We will find the stone that will smite the image on a certain date. So the dream goes on, somebody arrives. No? Somebody arrives in the dream. I try to explain to someone who arrived there, no? what I'm seeing and tell them about the mirror. Now, this is important for you. This goes to the personal belief. The person stands next to me and to see their reflection in mine. Why does the person who comes, the moon comes, here is Freya Atlas, and the first object to come there after the September 7 date is the moon on September 25.